Sophia Walker sat in her dimly lit apartment, the sound of the rain pattering against the windows filling the silence around her. The past few months had felt like a blur. Long days spent working, trying to get ahead in the competitive world of freelance consulting. It wasn't glamorous, but it was hers. Everything she had earned. It had taken years of hard work to get here, and she had never asked anyone for help. She didn't need anyone. Except for him. Mark Evans had been in her life for over 2 years now. At first, he seemed like everything she wanted, charming, successful, and with a smile that could light up the darkest room. They met online, a story as old as the internet itself, but one that Sophia never questioned. They'd been through so much together, or so she thought. When he said they were building a future, she believed him. But now, the truth was crashing down around her. Sophia had been scrolling through her banking app, as she did every day, ensuring everything was in order. She checked the bills, reviewed the savings, and made sure there were no unexpected charges. That's when she saw it. The notification from her credit card company that immediately sent a shockwave through her entire body. Unusual activity detected. Your card has been charged $7,800 at Luxe Apparel and $4,200 at a private resort. Please verify these transactions immediately. Her pulse quickened. Luxe Apparel? A private resort? She hadn't gone to either place. In fact, she hadn't bought anything in the past week, and she certainly hadn't been to any resort. Mark. Her stomach twisted as she dialed the number on her phone. He had access to her account. He knew her passcodes, her login details. They had shared everything, at least she thought they had. The phone rang 3 times before Mark picked up, his voice smooth and too calm. Hey babe, what's up? What the hell, Mark? Why is my card linked to Luxe Apparel? Why are there charges from a resort I never went to? There was a slight pause on the other end. She could hear him breathing, but he didn't answer right away. Mark always had an answer. He had always been the one with the quick, comforting words. But not now. I don't know, Sophia. Maybe it's a mistake, Mark said, his voice a little too shaky. Maybe you didn't notice it, but I used the card for some business expenses. I thought I told you about it. Sophia felt her hands go cold. Business expenses? Her credit card was being used for his business? No, you didn't tell me, Mark. You didn't ask me if it was okay. You didn't even mention any of this, Sophia said, her voice shaking now, but not from fear, from rage. I'm looking at the transactions right now. $7,800 for clothes and $4,200 for a resort? Where the hell are you? What are you doing with my money? He sighed heavily, and she could almost hear the guilt dripping from his voice. Look, Sophia, I didn't want you to worry. It's just business, and I'll pay it all back. Don't stress over it. I'll make sure everything is okay. No, Mark, you don't get to just use my credit card without permission and then brush it off as a mistake. This is fraud. She could feel her heart pounding now. The betrayal wasn't just emotional, it was financial. He had used her money as if it were his own. Sophia, please calm down. I didn't mean to hurt you, I just thought it'd be okay. I'll fix it. I'll pay you back. Just don't make this a bigger deal than it is. She hung up the phone before he could say anything else. He wasn't sorry. He was cornered, and he was trying to find a way out. But Sophia wasn't going to let him manipulate her again. The next few moments passed in a blur as she immediately contacted her bank, freezing the card and disputing the charges. She couldn't believe this was happening. Mark, the man she had shared her life with, had stolen from her. As she sat there, processing the situation, something clicked in her mind. She had been blind, so wrapped up in the illusion of their perfect life, that she hadn't seen how he had been draining her finances. And that wasn't even the worst part. Mark wasn't just a cheater. He had been using her for his own selfish gain. This wasn't just about the money, it was about the trust she had given him. Sophia wiped her tears away, feeling the surge of anger turn into clarity. She wasn't going to let this man ruin her life, her career, her financial stability. He had taken so much from her already. Her trust, her peace, and now her money. But this was it. This was the moment she decided that things would change. She would fight back, reclaim every penny he had stolen, and destroy him in ways he never saw coming. The first step was to stop thinking like a victim and start thinking like a strategist. She was no longer the woman Mark thought he could manipulate. She was going to rebuild her life, and in the process, she would make sure he lost everything. Sophia sat down at her desk, pulling out a pen and a notebook. She had to be precise, careful. Every detail had to be planned. 1. Gather evidence, all fraudulent transactions, receipts, and records of purchases. 2. Freeze the accounts, secure all her assets so that Mark couldn't manipulate any more funds. 3. Expose the truth. Get the legal system involved and make sure Mark faced the full consequences of his actions. 4. Take control, rebuild her financial future and career on her own terms. It was going to be a long road. But she wasn't scared. She had been through far worse. She had fought for everything in her life, and this would be no different. 2 days later, Sophia was sitting at her computer, a deep sense of purpose flooding her. She had gathered all the evidence of Mark's theft. She had secured her accounts, reached out to her bank's fraud department, and filed a formal dispute. But that wasn't enough. Not yet. She dialed a number she had been avoiding for weeks, Victor Delmar, a business associate of Mark's who she suspected had been feeding him lies. She had gathered information on him as well, and now, it was time to confront him. If Mark thought he could hide behind his business partner's shadow, he was wrong. Victor was someone who thought he was untouchable. He had always been too calm, too polished. Sophia could see through him, and she was going to expose everything. "Victor, it's Sophia Walker," she said, her voice calm but filled with unrelenting determination. "We need to talk. And this time, you won't be getting away with it." There was a long pause on the other end of the phone, followed by a sigh. "Sophia, you don't know what you're getting into," Victor said, his voice dropping into something more sinister. "You think you can play this game? You think you can just walk into my world and tear it down? You're nothing but a pawn." Sophia's smile was cold. "I'm done being a pawn, Victor. This ends now." The city was alive, the lights of downtown flickering like a constellation that reflected the turmoil in Sophia's mind. The first day had been one of shock, one of disbelief at the sheer audacity of Mark's betrayal. But now, as she sat at her desk, the harsh light of the laptop illuminated the resolve in her eyes. She had spent the entire night reflecting, reviewing every transaction, every lie he had told. Her fingers tapped rhythmically against the table as she stared at the bank's detailed statement. The charges were undeniable, each more extravagant than the last. Designer bags, expensive resorts, private jets. The man she had loved and trusted had drained her finances without a second thought, while playing the part of the perfect, loving boyfriend. The more she analyzed the evidence, the more furious she became. But anger alone wouldn't solve this. Strategy was her weapon now. Sophia pulled out her notebook, its pages filled with ideas, plans, and strategies for her next move. She would take back what was stolen, but more importantly, she would expose him. The world would know who Mark truly was, and he would never be able to manipulate anyone again. Sophia's first target was Victor Delmar, Mark's business associate, the silent partner behind the scenes who had orchestrated so much of the financial manipulation. She had already learned a great deal about him from her investigation, and now it was time to confront him. She dialed his number, her hand steady despite the weight of the moment. She had never been one to confront people head-on, but this was different. This was war. "Victor," she began, her voice firm but controlled, "we need to talk." There was a long pause on the other end, then the cool voice of Victor Delmar came through, thick with skepticism. "Sophia, I assume you're calling about Mark. I'm sure he's already explained things to you, so there's no need for dramatics." Sophia's lips curled into a tight smile. His tone made her blood boil, but she had prepared for this. "I'm not calling for Mark, Victor," she replied. "I'm calling for you. I know exactly what you've been doing, helping him steal from me. The bills, the business dealings, the schemes you've been running behind the scenes. I have all the evidence, and I'm not going to let you get away with it." Victor's silence on the other end spoke volumes. She could hear the shuffle of papers and then the sound of his chair creaking as he sat back, trying to regain control of the conversation. "Sophia," he said after a moment, his voice suddenly serious. "You don't understand what you're dealing with. This isn't just about the money. You think you can expose me? You think you can make me pay for Mark's mistakes? You'll regret it." Sophia felt the pulse of adrenaline surge through her. This was it. The moment when she would break free of their manipulation once and for all. "You've already lost, Victor. The game is over," she said, her voice cold and unwavering. "You've made your moves, and now I'm making mine. I suggest you make things right before I expose you. The truth is the one thing you can't run from." Victor's sigh echoed through the phone, but he said nothing more. He knew she was right. She was in control now, and it was time for him to face the consequences of his role in this. Sophia hung up the phone, her heart pounding in her chest. She wasn't just angry anymore, she was empowered. She had control of the narrative now. She wasn't just going to sit back and let Mark and Victor ruin her life. The first step of her plan had been executed. Victor Delmar was now aware that she had him cornered. The next phase was to cut off Mark's access. She couldn't let him use her credit cards anymore. Her bank accounts needed to be secure, but she also knew that Mark wouldn't stop. He would fight. He had always been the type to avoid confrontation when things went wrong, but now he had no choice. She pulled up her phone, dialing the fraud department at her bank. The voice on the other end was patient and understanding as she explained the situation. Within hours, her account was secured, all transactions were flagged, and a block was placed on any further charges from Mark's known merchants. But that wasn't enough. Mark had to feel the weight of his actions. Sophia's next step would be to contact the authorities. She was done playing the victim. She was done allowing him to use her, and now it was time to make him face the consequences of his choices. She reached out to a private investigator, someone who could trace the depths of Mark's financial web, exposing every lie and deceitful action he had ever taken. Nothing would be left hidden. Days passed, and the pressure mounted. Sophia felt herself growing more focused with each passing hour. The sting of betrayal was still there, lingering in her chest, but she refused to let it paralyze her. She was a woman on a mission, and no amount of guilt or doubt could stop her. Sophia's next move would be crucial, the face-to-face confrontation with Mark. She knew he would show up at her door sooner or later. He had always come back, always tried to play the part of the regretful lover. But not this time. This time, she would be the one in control. As she sat in her apartment, waiting for his inevitable knock on the door, her mind flashed back to their first days together, the innocent moments when everything had seemed so perfect. She had loved him with everything she had, but now she saw it for what it was, a manipulation, a game played by a man who wanted only to use her. The sound of a knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. It was Mark. Here he was, ready to try and talk his way out of everything. Sophia rose slowly from the chair, a determined look on her face. She walked to the door, took a deep breath, and opened it. Mark stood there, his usual smile fading when he saw the cold determination in her eyes. Sophia, we need to talk. I know things have gotten out of hand, but we can work this out. Sophia held up her hand, silencing him. No, Mark. You don't get to explain anything anymore, she said firmly. You've taken enough from me, and now you'll face the consequences. You're not welcome here. I'm done with you. He looked taken aback, his face falling as he saw the resolve in her eyes. There would be no easy apology this time. No charming words to smooth things over. Sophia was finished. You don't know what you're doing, Sophia, he said, his voice starting to shake. I was trying to build something for us. Don't you understand? Sophia took a step closer, her voice icy. What you don't understand, Mark, is that I'm done being your victim. I'm done being used. You don't get to take my money and my trust without consequences. You thought you could manipulate me, but you were wrong. I control the story now. Mark's eyes narrowed. He realized the truth, but it was too late. Sophia stepped back, closing the door in his face. She felt a strange sense of peace settle over her. With Mark and Victor both on the ropes, Sophia knew the next steps would be critical. She had taken back control of her life, and now it was time to make sure Mark's world came crashing down. The truth was out, and soon the whole world would know who he really was. But Sophia wasn't done. There would be no quiet revenge, no hiding behind legal battles. She was going to take everything, his money, his reputation, and most importantly, his freedom. She walked back to her desk, picking up the phone once more. She had a few more calls to make. This game wasn't over, not yet. The city stretched out before Sophia, an endless expanse of gleaming glass towers and flickering lights, a monument to the life she had built from the ground up. But beneath the polished surface of success, there was something much darker, something she had been too, blind to see until now. Mark had stolen from her, manipulated her, and used her for his own gain. And now it was time for him to face the consequences. The day after Mark's desperate attempt at an apology, the feeling of empowerment still lingered. Sophia had been prepared for him to beg, to grovel, but what she hadn't been prepared for was the raw guilt that clung to his voice. It was clear, Mark knew he had crossed a line, but he still didn't realize the depth of his betrayal. But that was about to change. Sophia sat at her desk, reviewing the evidence she had gathered over the past few days. The financial records, the emails between Mark and Victor Delmar, the hidden accounts, everything was falling into place. Mark had thought he could hide behind his charm, his sweet words, but now he was nothing but a shadow in her past. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from Lucas Gray, her lawyer. We've got the subpoenas ready for Mark's business accounts. The private investigator has linked him to several fraudulent companies. We can move forward with a lawsuit at any time. Sophia stared at the screen, her fingers tapping rhythmically on the table. It was time to act. Sophia stood in front of her full-length mirror, her reflection staring back at her. Who was this woman? The question had plagued her since that fateful night when she'd discovered Mark's deceit. She wasn't the same person she had been before the betrayal. That woman had been soft, vulnerable, and trusting. This woman, the one standing in front of the mirror, was someone else. She was strong, intelligent, and prepared to take on whatever came her way. Sophia had spent the last few days analyzing every transaction, every piece of evidence, and she had a clear vision in her mind of how she was going to take Mark down. Victor was still a threat, but the way she saw it, if she could destroy Mark, Victor's power would evaporate with him. She turned away from the mirror and walked to her desk, where her laptop awaited her. There was a message from Mark. We need to talk. I know I messed up, but I'm asking you to forgive me. Let's fix this together. She stared at the message, her finger hovering over the keyboard. He still thought this was about forgiveness, about him making it all better with his empty promises. But what Mark didn't understand was that he had already lost. Sophia's fingers flew across the keys as she typed her response. You can't fix this. You've stolen from me in ways I can never forget, Mark. You've broken everything between us, and I'm done with your lies. She hit send, a quiet satisfaction filling her chest. She had already made her decision, and now it was time to follow through. No more half measures. Victor Delmar had been careful. He had stayed in the background, hidden in the shadows, letting Mark take the fall for their joint crimes. But Sophia knew better. She had done her research, and she knew exactly how much Victor had to lose. Sophia had arranged a meeting with him, one that he didn't see coming. She had everything lined up, proof of his involvement in the fraudulent schemes, the money laundering, and the illegal business deals he had orchestrated behind the scenes. If Mark was a pawn, Victor was the mastermind. It was time to expose him for what he was. Sophia arrived at the upscale office building where Victor worked, his name etched on a brass plaque at the entrance. She felt a strange calmness as she entered the lobby. This was where the real confrontation would take place. Victor had underestimated her. She was no longer the woman who had been swindled and taken advantage of. She was the woman who would dismantle him piece by piece. The elevator ride up was silent. Sophia couldn't help but feel a sense of irony. She was about to face the man who had thought he could control her fate, the man who had been playing his own game, using others as pawns. When the elevator doors opened, Sophia stepped out into a sleek, modern office suite. Victor was waiting for her, sitting behind his polished desk, his expensive suit tailored perfectly to his form. He didn't look surprised to see her. He had expected this meeting. What he hadn't expected was the storm that was about to hit him. "Sophia," Victor said, his voice smooth but with a hint of tension beneath. "I thought we could avoid this, but it seems you're determined to bring it all to light. What exactly do you think you'll achieve by exposing me?" Sophia took a seat across from him, her eyes locking onto his. She could see the cocky confidence in his posture, the way he thought he was still in control. But that was the mistake. He had underestimated her. She wasn't some helpless woman anymore. "I'm here to make sure you face the consequences of what you've done," she said, her voice steady. "I'm going to make sure you lose everything, Victor. The people you've deceived, the money you've laundered, it's all coming out. You won't be able to hide behind your lies anymore." Victor's expression hardened, but Sophia could see the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. He was beginning to realize the truth. He wasn't the one in control anymore. "You don't know what you're dealing with," Victor said, his voice low and dangerous. "I have more power than you could ever understand. You think you can take me down with a few documents and a couple of fake accusations? You're wrong, Sophia. I will destroy you." Sophia leaned forward, her eyes never leaving his. "I'm not afraid of you, Victor, and I'm not the one who will be destroyed here. You're going down and I'll make sure you lose everything," she said, her voice sharp like a blade. Victor's face twisted with rage, but he said nothing. The air between them was thick with tension, but Sophia remained calm. She had already won. Later that night, as the sun set and the lights of the city flickered to life, Sophia stood at her desk, reviewing the legal documents. The first phase of her plan had been completed. Mark and Victor had both been exposed. The next step was more critical: make them feel the weight of their actions. Sophia knew it wasn't enough to simply take back her money. She wasn't just trying to recover. She was going to make them pay for every second they had taken from her. She picked up the phone, dialing Lucas Gray. She had made her decision. "It's time," she said into the phone. "Let's take this to court. Let's make them publicly accountable." Lucas's voice came through clearly, filled with confidence. "It's all set, Sophia. We'll bring them both down. You've got everything you need. You're not just taking back what they stole from you. You're destroying them." Sophia hung up the phone and turned her attention back to the skyline. She could feel the weight of her next steps, the next move in this dangerous game. The path she had chosen would lead her to victory, and nothing would stop her now. Sophia stood outside the towering glass building, the chill of the evening air biting at her skin. Victor Delmar's office was located on the top floor of one of the most exclusive skyscrapers in the city, and as she looked up at its gleaming facade, she felt a strange sense of calm wash over her. She'd been through so much to get to this point, but this, the confrontation with Victor, felt different. It was the final piece of the puzzle. She wasn't just seeking revenge anymore. She wasn't even thinking about the money he and Mark had stolen from her. What she was after now was something deeper: control. Victor had thought he could manipulate her, use her as a pawn in a game that she didn't even know she was playing. But now, she was in control. Sophia took a deep breath, adjusting the collar of her coat. The weight of the documents in her purse felt like a reminder that the moment of reckoning was almost here. She could feel the tingling anticipation in her chest. Today was the day she would finally bring Victor down. The elevator ride up to Victor's office felt like an eternity. Every floor she ascended, the tension in her body grew tighter. When the doors finally opened, she stepped into a sleek, polished lobby. The marble floors glistened under the fluorescent lights, and the receptionist looked up with a smile, seemingly unaware of the storm that was about to hit. "Good afternoon, Miss Walker. Mr. Delmar is expecting you." The receptionist's voice was polite, professional, but it didn't mask the slight unease in her tone. Sophia had a way of making people feel the gravity of the situation without even saying a word. She nodded and walked toward the elevator, the sound of her heels clicking sharply against the floor as she made her way to the plush set of doors ahead. The double doors opened smoothly, revealing Victor's expansive office. The view from the floor-to-ceiling windows was breathtaking, the city stretching out below, the skyline bathed in the last rays of sunlight. But Sophia wasn't here to admire the view. She was here to take back what was hers and to make sure Victor paid for what he had done. Victor was seated behind his enormous desk, as always. His sharp suit, perfectly tailored to fit his lean frame, gave him an air of invincibility. He rose to his feet when she entered, his usual smirk playing on his lips. "Sophia, I was wondering when you would finally show up," he said, his voice smooth, calm, and calculating. Sophia stood at the threshold of his office, her back straight, her posture unwavering. Confidence radiated off her in waves. It was no longer the fragile woman who had been tricked by Mark and Victor. This was a woman who had fought back, a woman who had clawed her way to power. "Cut the games, Victor," Sophia said, her tone firm but cool. "I didn't come here for small talk." Victor's eyes narrowed, but he didn't show fear. He was too experienced, too used to manipulating people to show weakness. "I know you're upset, but let's be real here. What do you think you're going to achieve by bringing me down? Do you think you can just tear apart everything I've built? You're playing a dangerous game." Sophia smiled, her lips curling into a small, confident smirk. "You think I'm playing a game, Victor? No, I'm just making sure you face the consequences. You've been stealing from people for years, and now it's time for you to lose everything." Victor's confident facade faltered for just a moment, his jaw clenching as he realized Sophia was no longer the naive woman he had once manipulated. She had strength, and she had the truth on her side. Sophia didn't wait for him to speak. Instead, she pulled out the documents from her purse and laid them carefully on his desk. The papers sounded heavy, almost as if they were a testament to everything he had done wrong. She flipped through them slowly, letting the rustling sound fill the space between them. "You think I'm bluffing?" she asked, her voice low and steady. "I have every piece of evidence, Victor. I know about the offshore accounts, the fake businesses, the money laundering schemes you've been running. You've been hiding behind Mark, but now you have no one to shield you." Victor's eyes flicked to the papers, and for the first time, the facade of confidence started to crack. He was beginning to understand that he wasn't in control anymore. "You're a fool, Sophia," he spat, trying to regain his composure. "You think you can take me down with a few documents? I've been untouchable for years. The law won't touch me. I'm protected." Sophia leaned forward, her gaze never leaving his. She could see the panic beginning to creep into his eyes. "The law isn't the only thing that will take you down, Victor," she said, her voice sharp like a knife. "You'll face public exposure. I'm going to make sure everyone knows who you really are, what you've done. And I'm going to make sure your empire crumbles." For a long moment there was only silence. Victor stared at her, his face a mixture of rage and fear. He wasn't used to being threatened, especially not by someone like Sophia. He had always been the one pulling the strings, but now, he was the one who was going to be exposed. "Do you really think you can ruin me?" Victor asked, his voice trembling slightly now. "You don't know what you're dealing with. I have people, connections. You can't do this." Sophia stood up straight, her expression cold. The power had shifted completely, and she could feel it. This was the moment she had been working toward, the moment when Victor Delmar's empire would come crashing down. "I don't need to know your connections, Victor," she said, her voice calm but laced with power. "All I need is the truth, and I've got that in spades. You won't be able to hide behind your money anymore. It's over." Victor looked at her, his face twisted with desperation, but the truth had already won. He was exposed. Mark had been a pawn, but Victor, he was the real player. And now, he was finished. Sophia turned on her heel and walked toward the door, the sense of empowerment rising in her chest with every step. She didn't need to say another word. Victor's downfall had already begun. She paused at the door, her hand resting on the handle. She didn't look back, but she could hear the sound of Victor's frustration behind her. "You'll regret this," he called after her, but it was too late. "No, Victor," she said, her voice steady. "You will." With that, she walked out of the office, leaving Victor Delmar behind. His empire was crumbling, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Sophia walked briskly down the hallway, the sound of her heels echoing in the stillness of the corporate building. The doors behind her closed with a definitive thud, marking the end of the meeting with Victor Delmar. She didn't look back. She couldn't afford to. Victor, the man who had been the puppet master pulling the strings behind Mark's facade, was now exposed. And as satisfying as that might have been, she wasn't done yet. The world outside seemed the same as it always had, busy, moving, indifferent. But for Sophia, everything had changed. She was no longer the woman who had been manipulated and betrayed. No, That woman had been erased. The woman who stepped outside now was someone else, stronger, wiser, and no longer willing to let anyone walk all over her. She had played the game the way they wanted her to for too long. It had been subtle, insidious, the way Mark and Victor had used her to fuel their greed. But now, she held the power. She would make sure they both lost everything they had built. Back in the office, Victor sat in stunned silence, staring at the documents Sophia had left behind. His mind raced. He had always known he was playing with fire, but he hadn't expected it to come to this. Sophia had proven herself far more dangerous than he'd ever imagined. Her calmness, her strategy, her ability to make him feel small, it was all too much. For the first time, Victor saw her for who she truly was. She wasn't a victim, she was a force. And that realization twisted something deep inside him. His fingers gripped the edge of the desk as he forced himself to think. How could he regain control? He picked up the phone and dialed the number he knew he had to call. It was time to reach out to Mark, but Victor was already aware that their situation was deteriorating fast. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about reputation, and both of them were about to lose it all. Mark had been pacing his apartment for hours, his mind whirling. He had tried everything to get Sophia back, every apology, every promise. But it hadn't worked. The media had already caught wind of the scandal, and his name was being dragged through the mud. His perfect life was slipping away, piece by piece. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about losing everything he had built, his career, his social circle, his status. He had tried calling Sophia a dozen times, but she wouldn't pick up. He had tried texting, emailing, and even showing up at her apartment, but she wasn't interested. The moment she had cut him off was the moment everything had fallen apart. In a moment of desperation, he picked up the phone again and dialed Victor's number. His voice shook when Victor answered. "Victor, it's Mark. You need to help me. I don't know what to do anymore. She's gone. She won't even talk to me. Everything is falling apart. We need to fix this." Victor's voice was cool, controlled, though there was a sharpness to it now that hadn't been there before. "Mark, there's nothing to fix. You've lost her, and we're both about to lose everything we've worked for. Sophia isn't just walking away from you. She's destroying us. She's got all the evidence, Mark. We can't hide anymore." Mark fell silent, his stomach sinking. He had suspected as much, but hearing it from Victor's lips made it all the more real. "What do we do now?" Mark asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Victor's tone was colder than ever. "We prepare for the fallout. The best we can do now is protect ourselves. Get ready for the media storm. The truth is going to come out, and there's nothing we can do to stop it." Sophia sat in the quiet comfort of her apartment, the glow of the laptop screen reflecting off her determined face. The final stages of her plan were underway. She had already contacted the authorities, had all the evidence ready for the courtroom, and the world was about to see Victor and Mark for who they really were. She couldn't help but feel a strange sense of satisfaction as she clicked through the files on her screen. This was it, the moment of justice. She had been through so much to get here, and now, as she prepared to take the next step, she could finally see the end in sight. But it wasn't just the legal victory that would bring her peace. It was the knowledge that she had taken back her life, her power, and most importantly, her freedom. The truth would be exposed, and both Mark and Victor would have no choice but to face the consequences of their actions. For once, Sophia was the one in control, and that knowledge gave her a feeling of power she had never experienced before. She didn't need their apologies. She didn't need their pity. What she needed was closure, and she was about to get it. The clock on her wall ticked down the seconds, and as the hands moved forward, Sophia clicked the send button on the final email. The documents were sent to the press, the court, and the authorities. There would be no turning back for either of them now. The press conference was set to take place in the next 48 hours. Sophia had arranged everything herself. No lawyer, no PR team. It was her story, and she was going to tell it. The public would see the truth. Mark and Victor wouldn't be able to escape the storm she had set in motion. It wasn't about revenge anymore, it was about exposure. Mark and Victor had lived their lives as if they were untouchable. They thought they could manipulate the world around them, but now the truth was coming for them. The days leading up to the conference were filled with a strange sense of calm. Sophia knew what she had to do, and she was prepared to do it. She wasn't just fighting for her money, she was fighting for herself, respect, and the dignity that Mark and Victor had tried to strip away. The day of the press conference arrived, and Sophia stood in front of the cameras, ready to speak. "I stand here today, not as a victim, but as a woman of strength," she said, her voice steady and clear. "I'm here to expose the truth. What Mark and Victor did wasn't just illegal, it was immoral. They thought they could use me, manipulate me, and take what was mine, but they were wrong. Today, we take back what's rightfully ours." The cameras flashed as Sophia spoke, her words cutting through the air like a blade. The press conference was a blur. The flashing cameras, the rush of reporters bombarding her with questions. It was all part of the plan. But none of it fazed her. As Sophia stood at the podium, poised and collected, she realized something deeper. This wasn't just about taking back her stolen money, or exposing the men who had betrayed her. It was about taking back control of her life. The months of manipulation, deceit, and betrayal had led her to this moment, a moment of power. She could see the faces in the crowd, the eager eyes of the media waiting for her to speak. Victor and Mark were watching from the back, their expressions barely masked. Victor looked like a man who had just realized he'd been backed into a corner from which there was no escape. Mark looked like the hollow shell of the man she once loved, a man who had long since lost the ability to charm or deceive. Sophia's gaze swept across the room, the satisfaction of this moment finally sinking in. She wasn't just speaking to the media, she was speaking to the world. This was the end of their games, the end of her victimhood. "I stand before you today," she began, her voice calm but carrying a quiet force, not as someone who's been wronged, but as someone who has taken back what was stolen. Mark Evans and Victor Delmar thought they could use me, manipulate me, and profit off my ignorance. But I'm here to tell you that the truth always comes to light. The room fell silent as the cameras clicked in rapid succession. Mark shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Victor's jaw tightened. And for the first time in months, Sophia felt the true weight of the power she had reclaimed. "They used my trust, my finances, and my heart as a means to an end," Sophia continued, her voice unwavering. "But they miscalculated. They thought I wouldn't fight back. They thought they could break me." She paused for a moment, letting the weight of her words settle into the room. She was no longer the naive woman who had been taken advantage of. She was a woman who had been reborn, stronger than ever. "Today I take back everything, the financial loss, the betrayal, the time they stole from me. I am reclaiming my life, and I will not stop until they face the consequences of their actions." Sophia turned slightly, her eyes meeting those of Mark. She could see the panic in his eyes. He knew he had lost, but it was Victor who had the most to lose. Victor had always been the one behind the curtain, the one pulling the strings. But now, the curtain was pulled back, and he was exposed. "This is just the beginning," she said, her gaze unwavering as she turned to address the press once again. "The legal action has already begun, and soon, you'll all know the full extent of their crimes. Their empire built on lies, fraud, and manipulation is crumbling, and I'm here to make sure it falls." The camera flashes grew even more intense, but Sophia remained steady, her presence commanding. She had done it. She had taken control. The world would soon know Mark and Victor for who they truly were, and she would ensure they would never have the power to harm anyone again. The following weeks were a blur of legal proceedings, media interviews, and public scrutiny. But for Sophia, they were also the beginning of something new, something better. The press had already picked up on the story. Articles were written, the fraud exposed, and Mark and Victor's names were now tied to their crimes. They couldn't escape. Sophia had made sure of that. The bank had frozen their accounts, the authorities had launched investigations, and their businesses were crumbling. The consequences they had avoided for so long were now catching up to them. Sophia spent her days meeting with her lawyer, Lucas Gray, who had been a pillar of support throughout the process. She had always been the kind of person who kept to herself, relying on hard work and self-sufficiency, but in Lucas she found a true ally. He had helped her navigate the complexities of the legal system and had ensured that everything was in place to bring Mark and Victor to justice. And with each passing day, Sophia's confidence grew. She could feel the weight of the past lifting. And for the first time in months, she began to believe in herself again. She was no longer the woman who had been deceived. She was the woman who had risen. It wasn't until the day of the final court hearing that Sophia allowed herself to feel a sense of closure. She had fought tirelessly to get to this moment, and now, the last step was in motion. She sat in the courtroom, her lawyer by her side, as the judge called the case to order. Mark was sitting on the opposite side, his face pale, his eyes darting nervously between the defense and the jury. Victor was nowhere to be seen. His legal team had decided to settle out of court, hoping to avoid further public embarrassment. But for Sophia, it wasn't just about the settlement. It was about justice. The judge looked down at the case file before him, his expression neutral. "The charges are clear," he said, his voice echoing through the room. "The defendants are found guilty of fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. They have exploited their positions to deceive and manipulate the plaintiff, Miss Sophia Walker. The court rules in favor of the plaintiff. The restitution will be paid, and further action will be taken to ensure that justice is served." Sophia felt the weight of the words settle in her chest, but it wasn't just the relief of victory she felt. It was the satisfaction of knowing that she had taken back control of her life. She had confronted her betrayers, exposed their lies, and made them pay for what they had done. Mark, whose face had been flushed with panic, hung his head in defeat. He was done. Victor, in his silence, had already fled the scene, unable to bear the weight of his own downfall. Sophia, however, remained composed. She stood tall, the finality of the court's decision giving her the strength to move forward. The following months were a time of healing and growth for Sophia. She used the settlement money to expand her business, and, for the first time, she allowed herself to dream bigger. Her marketing company flourished, and she found herself in the position of power she had always sought. But it wasn't just her business that grew, so did her sense of self. She traveled to places she had always dreamed of visiting, Paris, Tokyo, and the coast of Italy, and in each new destination she found a deeper connection to who she was becoming. She wasn't the woman of the past, the one who had been used and manipulated. She was Sophia Walker, a woman who had fought for herself and won. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It wasn't even about revenge. Sophia had regained her sense of self-worth, her power, and most importantly, she had reclaimed her life. The last chapter had been written. The future was hers.